Are you an empath or do you have something called complex PTSD? Today, we will be going through 6 traits, 6 ways to tell to help you decide, get some information, not to dwell on the past or get caught in all the details, but to fuel yourself and know yourself and be able to act in the present and show up in your real, most true self. I have a new microphone I'm trying out today, so hopefully it is working well. We're getting more technological around here on my YouTube channel that is really getting rolling in this relaunch, restart, refresh. So, first things first, most of you probably know what an empath is, and I'll be diving right into complex PTSD and first starting with the definition of it. So, what is complex PTSD? The number one book that I suggest on it is this one by Pete Walker. I've learned so much from him through the years on complex PTSD, what it is, how it starts. And Judith Herman, in her trauma and recovery book, has a really extensive definition as well on page 121 of her book. Pete Walker, I'm here on page 3 of his. He identifies complex PTSD as 5 troublesome features, or features that were designed to protect the person at the time, but become problematic when they show up in the present and keep us from being our truest self, as mentioned, and showing up in a way that is aligned with your values, your hopes, your intentions. So, in the last video, we talked about empath versus wounding, and today we're talking specifically about, are you an empath or are you doing something that I would call hypervigilant fawn response? And your nervous system is set on staying protected versus really connecting, which is what empathy really is. So, 5 characteristics of complex PTSD, and I'm going to read directly from Pete because this book is brilliant and he has a blog with a lot of awesome info as well. Pete Walker says CPTSD is delineated from post-traumatic stress disorder by 5 problematic features: emotional flashbacks, toxic shame, self-abandonment, a vicious inner critic, and 5 social anxiety. Emotional flashbacks are perhaps the most noticeable and characteristic feature of CPTSD. Survivors of traumatizing abandonment are extremely susceptible to painful emotional flashbacks, which, unlike PTSD, do not have a visual component. So they say, no, I don't have any visual flashback, or there's no flashback, there's no specific memory attached to it. And that makes a lot of sense because our wounding is stored as reactions, not so much specific memories and visuals, and that is especially the case when it comes to complex PTSD. Emotional flashbacks are sudden and often prolonged regressions to the overwhelming feeling states of being an abused or abandoned child. These feeling states can include overwhelming fear, shame, alienation, rage, grief, and depression. They also include unnecessary triggering of our fight-flight instincts. Flashbacks can range in an intensity from subtle to horrific. They can also vary in duration, ranging from moments to weeks on end, where they devolve into what many therapists call a regression. I think one of the most important parts of complex PTSD is the confusion element. And that often stands out to me, and so much of my work with clients is helping to piece apart confusion that can come up in the nervous system, in the brain, and get clarity on it. And I've done so much of this work myself. I write when I purchased a book and read it, and this is April 2019 while I was in Chicago. So I've been practicing this work specifically for almost 5 years, and before that, in other ways, I just didn't have a label for it, which for me was really validating and helped to piece apart some of that confusion that can come up and why the reactions can be so big and intense in real time when in fact they're rooted in a long time ago, and you don't need to have specific memories to be clear on that. Let's dive in, shall we? 6 traits that differentiate being an empath from complex PTSD. Oh, Diego thinks my new microphone is a toy, and he will probably try to grab it at times, but I'm in my natural environment, these little co-regulators, and typical life's distractions. 1, sensitivity and overstimulation. If you are an empath, you likely identify as being a sensitive person. And there definitely are differences between that, being an empath, and being a highly sensitive person. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. I'll do another video on that one. But first of all, when we think about an empath, it's being aware, attuned, perceptive to what is going on, noticing subtle shifts in the room, and that takes a high level of sensitivity. Complex PTSD also has a high level of sensitivity because when you were that child who felt alone, abandoned, stressed, you had to read the environment and read the caregivers, parents around you to know their mood and potentially avoid punishment, risk, more fear, more stress. So you may have learned to be attuned to that and be aware of that and to notice things that others may not, especially kids in childhood that are meant to be living this free, joyful, fun, present life and working through tough emotions in the care or trust connection of an adult who can regulate their own. This can make an empath or somebody with complex PTSD prone to overstimulation because when you have all this feedback that you're taking in and aware of, it can be overwhelming and overstimulating. So the difference between empath and complex PTSD is empath is coming at it from love, purpose, care, connection at one end of the spectrum. CPTSD to the extreme would be that you're near the other end of the spectrum, which is hypervigilance, fear, protection. Your nervous system is trying to protect versus really to connect. So it's trying to stay safe. And absolutely, we can fit into any buckets along the spectrum. We're never just cleanly in one at one end. But when we start to look at, okay, whew, yeah, you know what? I feel my body, my nervous system right now feels tension. I feel some constriction, some heaviness, some tightness. I feel like I am a cat dropped in a room, trying to be aware of all the things around me in order to protect myself instead of connecting and really focusing on that other person in an embodied way. Two is that empaths may absorb emotions. So those lines that differentiate us from other people may be more fluid. And as an empath, this can be such a gift because you can begin to understand by asking questions, getting curious, attuning to somebody else. You can almost begin to feel what they're feeling. And Dan Siegel calls this interpersonal neurobiology. I feel this all the time in my work where something in me will be impacted or hit, activated in a powerful way based on hearing other stories. So I might get tears in my eyes or have a reaction of heaviness or weight alongside somebody. And part of my job is to recognize, okay, is this my stuff coming up? And it probably is, right? Typically that's what allows us empathy, is having a similar experience to relate to, or not similar experience, but a similar emotion. Or is it that I am flooded with my own reactivity or flooded by my own experience and it's pouring out over into work with somebody else? And same with friends sharing stories, getting clear on those boundaries of where do I end and they begin? Where do they end and I begin? Complex PTSD, on the other hand, is managing others' emotions as a rule, we'll say. So on the spectrum of empathetically showing up and absorbing emotions in a helpful way that allows you to feel what somebody is feeling or to be in it alongside them. The other end of the spectrum is where you're managing other people's emotions or managing their perception of you. So this might look like where if you have a boss at work that comes in one day kind of huffing and puffing, an empath may be able to check in and say, hey, it seems like there's some tension here. What's going on? Is everything okay? And it's coming again from a place of curiosity, compassion, connection, instead of the other end of the spectrum, which is that complex PTSD reaction, which you may adapt your whole behavior to try to manage their emotions or try not to add to their stress. Try not to increase their stress. Try not to get a reaction that may be too scary for your nervous system or too big for your nervous system. It's a big one. When we're managing others' emotions as a rule and making a lot of assumptions about oh my goodness, this must be something that I did, or this must be something that I need to fix. I need to do better. There's personalizing going on or centering. So CPTSD, end of the spectrum, tends to personalize or make it about you, make it about us. And it's instead just our wounding popping up instead of, oh, I can be there for this other person. I can show up for them. Trait number 3 is introversion. And one of my favorite ones because I would identify as definitely an introvert, although I can definitely be social and turn it on and I love people. There he is trying to chomp on that microphone again. The difference in empathy type of introversion, where you're trying to reset. You are sensitive, you're attuned, you're aware, and you need some time to pull away, have solitude, be on your own in your own space with your own people, family, whoever is in your safe bubble of introversion, which introverts will understand that. And CPTSD, which is almost introversion more like protection, maybe you're toward the end of isolation instead of introversion. Introvert, you want time to recharge because your nervous system actually gets energy that way. And in this trait, we want to look at, ooh, am I going to that end of the spectrum where I'm actually isolating? Because that helps me avoid some of the shame that is activated around people. Or is it trying to avoid some of that fear that is activated around people? Personal story of how I use this, how I put this in practice. Last week was my birthday, and I went to Detroit with a couple of girlfriends for the weekend. It was a lot of fun. We had different foods, different beverages, so many rich, delicious, small plates with all kinds of different foods, all kinds of different ingredients that I typically don't get in this small town that I'm in. And it was a blast. And it can be challenging on my nervous system, no matter who I'm with or what we're doing, because of that high sensitivity, high absorption that I am continuously cautious of or cognizant of, rather. But it still requires that I am mindful of it. So, tried to go for walks while I was there, taking rest, took rest times, and had sleeping space to myself, which was incredible. And I noticed getting back this week, I had activities Monday night and Tuesday night after usual life, work, clients, social time, supporting others with dog walking and my own dogs and my own home and my own husband. So by this morning, which is Thursday, I was realizing that I was feeling crispy. Crispy is the word that I start to notice because it's this almost like I start to be more disembodied feeling. So I realized, okay, that introvert charge is really needed. And I definitely fall in both these camps. I think biologically, I have that empath tendency, and I identify as having CPTSD reactions, emotional flashbacks, things like that. So when I start to feel that crispy feeling now, I know, oh boy, time to listen to this and not let it go too far because that's when real burnout happens or resentment happens, irritability, when dropping balls, all kinds of things like that. In the past, I probably would have hustled through that and had some more coffee and just soldiered through and focused on my to-do list more than my nervous system capacity and what I could actually have capacity for. So instead, I took the time to surrender, shift my plans, and stay in bed and read. This allowed me time to connect with God first, which is a big part of my life, and connect with myself to really focus that gaze back toward me and my nervous system, build that embodiment from the inside out instead of try to force it or rush through it or hustle through it. And goodness gracious, I sure did feel better after giving myself the time, giving myself the space. I used to have this fear that no amount would ever restore or it wasn't really working. And now, since I have this belief and faith, I notice so many shifts. This can look different for everybody. So, your story about managing introversion versus isolation may look totally different, but I see it as such a valuable way to honor the unique way that I'm created and be available for connection and not just manage everybody else's emotions and expectations and have life come at me where I'm dealing with it reactively versus really responding to what is most important. Trait number 4, here we go, is intuitive. Empaths tend to be more intuitive. So, meaning we tend to almost predict or know or can guess what is coming, what may be happening, kind of this ability to read a room. I definitely relate to this. There are so many times where I'd be watching a movie with my husband and I would say things early on, like, "Oh, this is going to happen," or okay, I'm seeing the ending. I'm seeing how this will work out." Not so much that I was seeing it in my mind, but I could form an idea of what to expect or kind of what was happening based on my intuition, my gut instincts. People with CPTSD can also have this intuitive sense. And it is often because the people closest to them have been some of the most harmful. Betrayal is a big theme with complex PTSD. So, because it tends to happen in the early years through childhood, really becomes part of our sensory network to anticipate and predict situations, events, scenarios, others' moods, and that's where this intuitive sense can come in. So instead of, again, this intuition being something that is cool or fun or exciting or interesting, with that CPTSD spectrum side of things, your nervous system is trying to predict because you have been harmed in the past. And you have been harmed by people that are really close to you or that said they loved you. So, in order to try to stay safe and secure, you are trying to predict and guess and read the room to try to avoid that in the future. Trait number 5 is being overwhelmed by relationship. So, empaths may be overwhelmed by relationship because you put so much into relationships. You are the one that is always remembering birthdays, remembering parts of people's stories, remembering the small details that others may forget. And that can be overwhelming because it's a natural reaction to trying to maintain too many relationships than anyone's nervous system could keep up with. CPTSD spectrum side of things is overwhelmed by relationship typically because relationships have not been safe. So ideally, we go to relationships when we are stressed. We go to relationships when we share joy. And as a rule, ideally we want that stress to ease more often than not when we're in relationship with others. And we want joy to increase or expand or to feel bigger. So if you share something joyful with a friend, ideally you feel more joyful. More often than not, again, doesn't need to be every time. None of this is black and white. But if you go to them with stress, you have space to talk it through. They're curious about what's coming up for you. They are able to hear, listen, and help you get clarity around some of that confusion. CPTSD side of things will be overwhelmed by relationship because you tend to play roles in relationships. You may be fawning or adapting, shape-shifting who you need to be in order to stay connected with that person. Or you may detach altogether and keep everybody at arm's length because it has not been nourishing and safe to share yourself and to be vulnerable. So this overwhelm by relationship can come with both, and it's subtle nuances over what is the intention, what is the reason you are overwhelmed, or where is that coming from, and knowing yourself and where to go from there. Our last trait that we will go through today is trait number 6, which is gazing inward versus gazing outward. So as an empath, we are wired to look outward, to be scanning others' states, emotions, and not get totally swept up in them. So it comes from this embodied place of knowing ourselves first and then being able to listen to another's story and not just be curious and compassionate toward it, but also maybe challenge or question or wonder what was really coming up or going on for them. So an empath doesn't always look kind of cozy, snuggly, smiley. It can come from this embodied place of, hey, there's something you're doing here or saying here that doesn't really seem to align with truth. And I'm embodied enough in myself to bring it up and question it and be okay or trust myself to move through whatever your reaction is. So, an empathy from an embodied place feels grounded. It feels like there's an anchor. So, if somebody's sharing something like this turbulent ocean, that stress and tumultuous, embodied empathy is this anchor, this grounding force that says, hey, I can take what your experience is while also gazing inward or being in my own. CPTSD is this constant, chronic lesson of gazing outward or never gazing outward. So it can go both ways. Constantly gazing outward would be where you hear somebody's story and you almost join their ocean, that tumultuous, stressful ocean. So when you hear it, it pops up these old reactions or your need to play a role. And suddenly you're kind of swimming or drowning out in this ocean with them, where you get pulled in almost an enmeshed way, or where those boundaries are so fluid that you're detached from yourself. You are not gazing inward in this embodied way. You are out there swimming in the ocean with them, which isn't always a great feeling for everybody. And it may really feel pseudo good to this person if they're not used to embodied empathy. So it feels like, wow, this person is so attuned to me. This person is so invested in me. They really feel me. But we want to be careful that we are coming from an embodied place first, not that wounded, reactive place that is more detached and hasn't been safe to connect truly under stress with maintaining that level of yourself without getting lost in what is around you. So that is 6 traits of an empath versus CPTSD. Picking apart these traits for you can really help to know, okay, what is the most healthy thing to do for me? And how can I wire this new pathway where I'm not going down that old wounded pathway, reactive land, I'll call it. I am clicking over to this new pathway, which is coming from a place of purpose, compassion, love, curiosity, interest. In the next video, we will look at what to do with all of this information. So now that you are looking at yourself, becoming self-aware, knowing traits, what do we do with it? We'll actually look at a ladder of nervous system states so you can identify when you may tend to pop into some of these old CPTSD reactions and when you are grounded, anchored, secure in yourself, because we're all along that spectrum somewhere. And under stress, we can definitely lean toward more old patterns than otherwise. Like, subscribe if you are interested in all of this. I will be sharing a lot more about it and hope it's super helpful in your world.